The insurance check sat on my kitchen table for 3 days before I could bring myself to open it. 42 years of marriage, and this was what it came down to, a number on a piece of paper that barely covered Richard's funeral costs. I was 63 years old, sitting alone in our house on Cedar Street in Medford, Oregon, trying to figure out how to make a teacher's pension stretch further than it was ever meant to go. I'd taught 3rd grade for 37 years. Retired at 60, thinking Richard and I would finally have time. Time to visit Sarah in Denver, time to take that trip to the coast we'd always talked about, time to just be. But cancer doesn't care about your plans. 18 months after my retirement party, I was sitting in that same kitchen, newly widowed, staring at bills I couldn't pay. That's how I ended up applying for a job at Riverside Medical Center. Not as a nurse or anything that required going back to school, just a billing clerk position. Evening shift 3 nights a week. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. 3 to 11:30 p.m. filing insurance claims and coding medical procedures in a basement office that smelled like old files and industrial cleaner. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept the lights on. More importantly, it kept me busy, kept my mind from wandering to the empty chair at the dinner table, the side of the bed that stayed cold, the coffee maker that now only made 1 cup at a time. My daughter Sarah called every Sunday from Denver like clockwork. "Mom, you could come live with me," she'd say, her voice tight with worry. "There's plenty of room and you'd be close to the grandkids." But Sarah was a surgical nurse working 12-hour shifts, and her husband traveled for work. The last thing she needed was her mother moving in, becoming another responsibility. Besides, I wasn't ready to leave Medford. This was my home. Richard and I had chosen the wallpaper in the living room together. His handprints were still in the concrete of the back patio from when we'd poured it 20 years ago. I couldn't just walk away from that. So I worked. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. 8.5 hours of staring at computer screens, translating doctor's notes into billing codes, following up on insurance denials. My coworkers were pleasant enough, mostly younger women with families and lives to rush home to. I was the oldest person in the department by at least 15 years. The routine was simple. I'd catch the 2:20 p.m. bus from the stop near my house, arrive at the hospital by 3 Huzzur's work until 11:30, then catch the last bus home, arriving just after midnight. For 3 months, it worked perfectly. Then September came and everything changed. Budget cuts, they said. The city needed to trim expenses. The last bus now left at 11 Huzzur p.m., a full 30 minutes before my shift ended. I tried talking to my supervisor, Janet Rodriguez, about leaving early those 3 days. Janet was sympathetic but firm. "Tanisha, you know I'd love to help, but we're already short-staffed. If you leave at 11, someone has to cover that last half hour. It's not fair to the others." She was right, of course. And I needed every hour of work I could get. So I did what I had to do. I pulled out the smartphone Sarah had insisted on buying me last Christmas. "Mom, you need to join the 21st century." And I downloaded a rideshare app. I'd never used anything like it before. The idea of a stranger picking me up, of getting into a car with someone I didn't know, made my stomach clench. But what choice did I have? A taxi would cost $30 each way. The rideshare app showed $6 to $8. Simple math. The first Tuesday night I requested a ride, I sat in the staff locker room for 10 minutes after my shift ended, phone in hand, staring at the app. A map showed little cars moving around Medford like electronic ants. Finally, at 11:35, I pressed the button. A notification popped up almost immediately. "David is on his way. Silver Toyota Camry. ETA 4 minutes. I grabbed my purse and headed to the staff entrance, my heart beating faster than it should. The parking lot was poorly lit, just a few yellow sodium lights casting everything in an eerie glow. I could see my breath in the September air. Headlights swept across the lot. A silver Camry pulled up, and I checked the license plate against the one on my phone. It matched. The driver was a black man, probably late 50s, with gray threading through his close-cropped hair. He looked tired. Deep lines creased his forehead and bracketed his mouth. But when he glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes were kind. "Tanisha?" His voice was deep quiet. "Yes. Thank you for coming." I slid into the back seat, pulling my coat tight around me. The car was clean, smelled faintly of coffee. A photo was tucked into the sun visor on the passenger side, a baby girl, maybe 6 months old, with a pink bow in her hair. 847 Cedar Street, he confirmed. "That's right." He pulled out of the parking lot smoothly, and we drove in silence for the first few minutes. I watched the familiar streets of Medford pass by the window. The closed-up shops on Main Street, the old theater with its vintage marquee, the park where Richard and I used to walk on Sunday afternoons. "Long shift?" he asked, breaking the silence. I glanced up, meeting his eyes in the rearview mirror. "Every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday." He nodded. "Regular schedule. That's good. Makes it easier to plan." "How long have you been driving?" I asked, surprising myself. I usually didn't make small talk with strangers. "About 3 years now." He paused, and I saw his jaw tighten. "Lost my job at the Timber Ridge Mill when it closed down. This keeps me afloat." There was something in his voice, not self-pity, but a quiet resignation that I recognized. It was the same tone I heard in my own voice when I told people about my new job. The sound of someone who'd had different plans for their life. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. His eyes met mine in the mirror again, and I saw surprise flicker across his face. "Thank you." A pause. "Thank you, ma'am." "Carol," I corrected automatically, then caught myself. "I mean Tanisha. My name is Tanisha." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "David," he replied. "David Patterson." We turned onto Cedar Street, and he pulled up in front of my house. The porch light was on. I'd started leaving it on before I left for work, hating the idea of coming home to a dark house. "Thank you, David," I said, gathering my purse. "Have a good night, Tanisha. Stay safe." I tipped him $5 through the app, more than the 20% the app suggested, but it felt right. Then I walked up to my door key, already in hand, and let myself into the empty house. The next Thursday, I requested a ride at 11:35. The app showed several drivers nearby, but I waited watching. After about 20 seconds, a notification popped up. "David is on his way." Something in my chest loosened. A familiar face, or at least a familiar name. When his silver Camry pulled up, I felt myself relax in a way I hadn't expected. I climbed into the back seat, and David already had my address plugged in. "Evening, Tanisha." "Evening, David. How was your day?" And just like that, we fell into conversation. Nothing deep, just the weather traffic, how the hospital was busier than usual because flu season was starting. But it felt good. Natural. By the third week, I realized it wasn't coincidence. David was waiting for me. He'd log on around 11:20, position himself near the hospital, make sure he'd be the one to accept my ride request. I should have found it strange, maybe even unsettling. But I didn't. There was nothing creepy about David, nothing that set off alarm bells. He was just a lonely man, same as I was a lonely woman, and those 12-minute drives had become the best part of both our days. The conversations deepened week by week. I learned that David's wife Patricia had left him 2 years ago. Not out of anger, out of exhaustion. The mill closing had devastated him financially, and he'd struggled to find work at 54. Patricia had stayed as long as she could, but eventually she'd had enough of the stress, the uncertainty, the watching their savings disappear. She took our daughter Emily with her. David told me one October night, his voice thick. Emily was 26, old enough to make her own choices, but she sided with her mother. Said I'd given up. Said I wasn't fighting for us anymore. "Had you?" I asked gently. "Given up." He was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe. I don't know." Everything felt so hopeless. I'd sent out 200 resumes. Nobody wants to hire a 54-year-old former security supervisor from a closed mill. "Emily just had a baby," he continued. "Little girl named Lily. I've only seen pictures. Patricia sends them sometimes. She's not cruel. She's done with me." Without thinking, I reached forward and squeezed his shoulder. "Babies have a way of bringing families back together." He cleared his throat. "That's kind of you to say, Tanisha." I started tipping him extra. Not much, just a few dollars more than my usual. The first time he messaged me through the app, "You tipped too much. Let me refund the difference." I messaged back, "You're keeping an older woman safe at midnight. That's worth something." The truth was those 3 rides a week had become precious to me. David never pitied me, never treated me like a burden. He listened when I needed to talk and stayed quiet when I needed silence. He asked about Sarah and the grandkids in Denver. He remembered that I'd mentioned being worried about a weird noise in my furnace and followed up the next week to ask if I'd gotten it fixed. In November, I started bringing him coffee. It started on a Tuesday. I'd gone to the hospital cafeteria for my dinner break and bought 2 cups of coffee, one for me, one extra. When David's Camry pulled up at 11:35, I walked over with both cups and handed one through the window before getting in. He stared at it like I'd handed him gold. "Tanisha, you didn't have to." "I know. I said, settling into the back seat. But hospital coffee is terrible, and it's even worse when it's been sitting in the pot for 6 hours. I figured you could use it more than I could. It's still hot. He took a sip and his eyes closed for just a moment. Thank you. Truly. After that, the coffee became routine. I'd leave my desk at 11:25, swing by the cafeteria, buy 2 cups, and bring them out with me. David started pulling up right at 11:33, timing it perfectly, so the coffee would still be hot when we started driving. We'd drive through the quiet streets of Medford, sipping our drinks, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about the strange passengers he'd picked up, the late-night conversations, the surprising cross-section of humanity he met in his car. A college kid who'd just failed out of school, a nurse finishing a double shift, a man visiting his dying mother in the hospital. I told him about Richard, about learning to live alone, about the strange grief that hit at unexpected moments, not when I was sitting alone at home, but when I was in the grocery store and saw his favorite brand of coffee, or when a song came on the radio that we used to dance to in the kitchen. "You're a good person, Tanisha," David said one night in late November, pulling up to my house. "I want you to know that." I felt tears prick my eyes. "So are you David?" December arrived with unusual cold for Oregon. Frost coated my lawn in the mornings, and I had to scrape my windshield on the days I drove myself to doctor's appointments. The hospital decorated for Christmas tinsel in the cafeteria, a sad little tree in the main lobby. I brought David hot chocolate instead of coffee one Thursday night, with a little candy cane taped to the cup. He laughed when he saw it, a real laugh the first I'd heard from him. My Patricia used to do things like this, small kindnesses. I didn't appreciate them enough at the time. "You appreciate them now," I said. "That's what matters." But something else was happening at work. Something I didn't tell David about at first. It seemed like just an accounting issue, nothing important. It started in early November. Janet, my supervisor, noticed discrepancies. Patient files that showed procedures had been billed to insurance, but when we went to pull the physical records, they were missing. "It's probably just a filing error," Janet said, frowning at her computer screen. "Someone put them in the wrong box." But then we found more. And more. By the end of November, we'd identified 23 missing files, all elderly patients, all on Medicaid or Medicare. The kind of patients who probably wouldn't notice if they got a bill for a procedure they didn't have. Janet formed a small audit team herself, me and 2 other billing clerks. We were going through everything manually, cross-referencing billing records with physical files. "This is going to take months," Janet sighed. "But if someone's committing insurance fraud, we need to find it." I didn't think much about it, honestly. It was just another work project. I certainly didn't connect it to the man in the maintenance uniform I sometimes passed in the hallway around 11:15, the one pushing a rolling cart full of cleaning supplies, always wearing a baseball cap pulled low. I never looked at his face, never paid attention. He was just part of the scenery, another person working the night shift. I should have paid attention. On a Tuesday night in mid-December, I came out to meet David at 11:33 as usual, 2 cups of hot chocolate in hand. As we drove down Cedar Street toward my house, I noticed a red Ford F-150 parked 2 houses down from mine. "That's Kevin's truck," I said absently. "My neighbor." "You know him well?" David asked. "Not really. We wave when we see each other getting mail or taking out trash. He seems nice enough. Works night shift somewhere, I think. His truck's gone most days." David didn't say anything, but I saw his eyes flick to the rearview mirror, looking at the truck as we passed. He pulled up in front of my house. "Have a good night, Tanisha." "You too, David. Drive safe." I walked up to my door key in hand and let myself into the house. I didn't notice that David's car didn't leave right away. Didn't notice that he sat there for 10 minutes watching. Didn't notice that the red F-150 2 houses down stayed there until 1 a.m., engine running, lights off, someone sitting in the driver's seat. Watching my house. David didn't tell me what he'd noticed that first Tuesday night. Looking back, I understand why. A man learns to trust his instincts, but he also learns not to alarm people without cause, especially not a woman who was already dealing with grief and loneliness. But David had been a security supervisor for 23 years. Observation was in his blood. So when he drove away from my house that night and saw the red F-150 still sitting there, engine running 2 houses down from mine, he made a note of it. Not just a mental note. David pulled over at the end of the block, took out his phone, and opened a notes app. December 12th, Tuesday, 11:47 p.m. Red Ford F-150, Oregon plates. Parked 823 Cedar Street. Engine running, lights off. Tanisha says it belongs to neighbor Kevin. Why parked away from his own house? Then he drove home to his small apartment near the highway and told himself he was being paranoid. Except old habits die hard. And some instincts you can't ignore. Thursday night, David picked me up at 11:33 as usual. I handed him his hot chocolate through the window with 2 candy canes this time because the cafeteria lady had been feeling generous. "You're going to spoil me," David said, that rare smile crossing his face. "Someone should," I replied, climbing into the back seat. We talked about Christmas. Sarah wanted me to fly to Denver, but the ticket was expensive and I didn't want to leave work. David had no plans. Emily hadn't called. He'd sent Lily a Christmas present, a pink teddy bear, but he didn't know if she'd received it. "Give it time," I said. "Patricia isn't cruel. She'll come around." As we turned onto Cedar Street, I was talking about the audit at work, how we'd found 15 more missing files that week. I barely noticed when David's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, then to the street ahead. The red F-150 was there again. Same spot. Engine running. "Tanisha," David said carefully, "your neighbor Kevin. What time does he usually get home from work?" I blinked at the sudden question. "I don't really know. I work evenings, so I'm not home much. Why?" "Just curious. His truck's there again." I glanced over as we passed. "Maybe he's having car trouble and doesn't want to move it into his driveway until he gets it fixed." "Maybe," David said, "but after he dropped me off, he didn't leave. He parked at the end of the block again where he could see both my house and the F-150. He waited. 15 minutes passed. 20. At 12:15 a.m., the truck's lights came on. It pulled away slowly, deliberately, and drove past my house. David couldn't see the driver's face, just a silhouette, but he noted the time. December 14th, Thursday, 12:15 a.m., F-150 departed. Sat for 30-plus minutes after Tanisha went inside. Saturday night, David did something different. He logged onto the rideshare app at 11:15, not 11:20. He drove to Cedar Street first before picking me up. The F-150 was already there, parked in the same spot. At 11:17 p.m., more than 15 minutes before I'd even left work, David felt his chest tighten. He'd been a security supervisor long enough to know what surveillance looked like. This wasn't a neighbor with car trouble. This was someone watching my house. He drove to the hospital, picked me up at 11:33, and we had our normal conversation. I complained about a difficult insurance claim. He told me about a passenger who'd accidentally left a guitar in his trunk. I laughed and he smiled and everything seemed normal. But when we turned onto Cedar Street, the F-150 was there. "Tanisha," David said, keeping his voice level, "I need to ask you something and I want you to answer honestly. Do you feel safe in your neighborhood?" I looked at him surprised. "Of course. Why wouldn't I? No strange occurrences. Nothing that's made you uncomfortable." "David, what's this about?" He pulled up in front of my house. "Probably nothing. Just promise me something. Keep your doors locked. All of them. Windows too. And if anything feels off, anything at all, you call me. Not through the app. Here." He handed me a card with his personal cell phone number handwritten on it. "You're scaring me," I said. "I don't mean to. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've learned to pay attention. And something doesn't feel right. That's all." I took the card, tucking it into my wallet. "Okay, I'll be careful." But I was more puzzled than worried. This was Medford. Cedar Street. I'd lived here for 28 years. What could possibly be wrong? I went inside, locked the door behind me, and went to bed. Outside, David sat in his car for 45 minutes. The F-150 didn't move until 1:30 a.m. Sunday afternoon, David sat in his apartment with his laptop and a cup of gas station coffee. He'd written down the F-150's license plate number, Oregon 847BXT. He knew he couldn't just run a plate search himself. That required law enforcement access. But he had friends. Former co-workers from the mill who'd gone into different fields. One of them, James Hartley, worked for a private security company now. David called him. "Dave, man, it's been 2 years. About that. Listen, James, I need a favor. Off the books." There was a pause. "What kind of favor?" "I need you to run a plate for me." "Dave, you know I can't—" "There's a woman," David interrupted. "Older lady, widowed. I think someone might be stalking her. I need to know who owns a truck that's been sitting outside her house late at night." Another pause. Then, "Give me the number." 10 minutes later, David's phone buzzed. A text from James, Oregon, 847BXT. Registered to Kevin Bradley Mitchell, 45, 8223 Cedar Street, Medford. No priors. Works at Riverside Medical Center, maintenance D. Pete. Dave, be careful with this. David stared at his phone. Riverside Medical Center. The same hospital where Tanisha worked. That wasn't a coincidence. That was a connection. He opened his notes app and started typing everything he knew. Times, dates, observations. His instincts had been right. Something was very wrong. But he needed more before he could go to Tanisha. He couldn't just tell her that her neighbor was watching her house without solid proof. Not when that neighbor worked at her hospital. So he waited. And he watched. Monday morning, David did something he'd never done before. He drove to Riverside Medical Center and parked in the visitor's lot. He sat there from 7:00 a.m. to 9:00 a.m. watching the employee entrance. At 7:43 a.m., a red F-150 pulled into the parking lot. The driver was a white man, medium build, brown hair under a baseball cap. He wore navy blue maintenance coveralls. Kevin Mitchell. David took photos. Not close-ups, he didn't want to be obvious, but enough to document the truck, the time, the fact that Kevin worked at the hospital. Then David went home, slept for a few hours, and prepared for Tuesday night. Tuesday, December 19th. The night everything changed. David logged on at 11:00 p.m. He drove straight to Cedar Street, arriving at 11:10. The F-150 wasn't there yet. He parked where he could see Tanisha's house and waited. At 11:14, the F-150 appeared. But this time it didn't park 2 houses down. It pulled directly in front of Tanisha's house. David's heart rate spiked. He picked up his phone, opened the video camera, and started recording. At 11:17, Kevin Mitchell got out of the truck. He looked around quickly, nervously, then walked up to Tanisha's front porch. David kept recording. Kevin tried the front door handle. Locked. He peered through the window beside the door using a small flashlight. Then he walked around to the side of the house, testing the windows. All locked, thank God. Kevin returned to his truck but didn't get in. He stood beside it, looking at the house, checking his watch. Waiting for Tanisha to come home. David's hands shook as he held his phone steady. He'd been right. This wasn't paranoia. This was real. At 11:28, David knew he had to act. He couldn't let Tanisha come home to this. He quickly drove to the hospital, his mind racing. I was just finishing up my last report when my phone rang. David's number, his personal cell, not the app. Tanisha, where are you right now? The urgency in his voice made my stomach drop. I'm at my desk. David, what? Stay there. I'm coming to get you. Do not leave the building. David, you're scaring me. I know. I'm sorry. But Tanisha, you need to trust me. Do not go outside until I get there. He hung up. I sat there, my heart pounding, staring at my phone. Janet walked by, pulling on her coat. Heading out, Tanisha. Not yet, I managed. I need to finish something. She nodded and left. I waited alone in the basement office, every sound making me jump. 7 minutes later, David called again. I'm in the staff parking lot. Can you see a silver Camry from where you are? I went to the window. Yes, I see you. Come out. Walk quickly, but don't run. Get in the T. I grabbed my purse and coat, my hands shaking. What was happening? Was I in danger? Was David? I pushed through the staff entrance and hurried to his car. This time I got in the front seat without being asked. Drive, I said. Tell me what's going on. David pulled out of the parking lot, but instead of turning toward Cedar Street, he went the opposite direction. David, we're not going to your house. What, why not? He handed me his phone. Watch the video. I pressed play. The footage was dark shot from inside a car, but I could make out my porch, my front door. A figure approached a man in a baseball cap and dark clothing. My neighbor, Kevin. I watched him try my door, peer through my windows, test the locks. Oh my God, I whispered. That was 45 minutes ago, David said quietly. Tanisha, this isn't the first time. He's been watching your house for at least a week, maybe longer. But why I barely know him? I don't know yet, but I know this: he works at your hospital, maintenance department, night shift. The words hit me like ice water. Night shift, maintenance, access to the entire building, the missing files, the audit. The basement hallway where I sometimes saw a man with a cleaning cart, always wearing a cap pulled low, always looking away when I passed. The files, I breathed. David, we've been doing an audit at work. Medical records are missing. We think someone might be committing insurance fraud. David's hands tightened on the steering wheel. And you're part of the audit team? Yes, me and 3 others. We've been going through everything trying to figure out what happened to the missing files. Does anyone at work know you're on this team? Is it public information? It's not a secret. People know. Our supervisor mentioned it in a staff meeting last month. David's jaw clenched. Tanisha, I think Kevin knows you're investigating. I think he knows you might expose him. And I think he's been trying to figure out if you have any evidence at home. The pieces clicked together in my mind, forming a picture I didn't want to see. He was going to break in, I said, while I was at work. Not tonight. He couldn't get in. But Tanisha, David glanced at me, his face grim. What happens next time? What if he finds another way? What if he decides you're too much of a risk? I felt cold all over. Where are we going? The police, right now. David, what if I'm wrong? What if he's just I don't know? Tanisha. David pulled into a parking lot and turned to face me fully for the first time. I've been doing this job for 3 years. I've picked up hundreds of people. I know when something's wrong. This is wrong. Trust me, please. I looked into his eyes and saw something I recognized. It was the same desperate need I'd seen in Richard's eyes when he'd been trying to convince me to let him go to the hospital when his pain got too bad. The need to protect someone you care about. David cared. This wasn't just a passenger to him anymore. I wasn't just a fare. Okay, I said. Let's go to the police. The Medford Police Department was surprisingly busy for nearly midnight on a Tuesday. A young officer took our initial statement, then fetched an older woman, Detective Sarah Morrison, her badge said. She was in her 40s with steel gray eyes and the tired expression of someone who'd seen too much. But she listened carefully as David and I explained everything. David showed her his notes, the dates, times, observations, the photos, the video of Kevin trying my door. You're certain this is the same person who works at the hospital? Detective Morrison asked. I had someone run his plates, David admitted. Kevin Bradley Mitchell. He works maintenance at Riverside Medical Center. The detective's eyebrows rose. You had someone run his plates. I used to work security. I still have contacts. Detective Morrison studied David for a long moment, then nodded. She wasn't going to make an issue of it. Mrs. Williams, she said, turning to me. Tell me about this audit. I explained everything. The missing files, 38, now the number had grown. All elderly patients, all Medicaid or Medicare. The suspicion that someone was submitting false insurance claims. Our team's methodical search through physical records. And Kevin Mitchell would have access to these files. All maintenance staff have master keys. They clean offices, empty trash, do repairs. They can access almost anywhere in the hospital during night shift when fewer people are around. Detective Morrison leaned back in her chair. So he has means and opportunity. And if he thinks you're getting close to exposing him, he has motive. But I haven't found anything yet, I protested. I don't have any proof it's him. He doesn't know that, David said quietly. He just knows you're looking. Detective Morrison pulled out a notepad. Here's what's going to happen. We'll get a warrant to search Mr. Mitchell's property. But that takes time. We need to go before a judge show probable cause. In the meantime, Mrs. Williams, you cannot go home. Where am I supposed to go? Hotel? Family? Friend? Anywhere but Cedar Street. I thought of my empty house, Richard's handprints in the concrete, 28 years of memories. Then I thought of Kevin Mitchell standing on my porch, trying my door. I'll get a hotel, I said. I'll stay with her, David added. Separate rooms, but I'm not leaving her alone. Detective Morrison looked between us, a flicker of something approval, maybe crossing her face. All right, give me your contact information, both of you. I'll call as soon as we have the warrant. 20 minutes later, David and I sat in the parking lot of the Medford Inn, neither of us moving. I can't believe this is happening, I said finally. I'm sorry. Why are you apologizing? You probably saved my life. David was quiet for a moment. Then, 8 years ago, my daughter Emily had a boyfriend. Nice guy, we all thought. Until she mentioned he'd been driving past her apartment at odd hours, that he always seemed to know where she was. I turned to look at him. I told her she was being paranoid. David continued, his voice thick with old regret. I said she was flattering herself that he wasn't that interested. I didn't pay attention to the warning signs. What happened? He broke into her apartment one night. Put her in the hospital with a fractured skull and 3 broken ribs. Oh, David. That's when Patricia had enough. Of me, of my inability to protect our family. She took Emily and left, and I don't blame her. He looked at me, his eyes bright with unshed tears. So now I pay attention. I listen when people talk. I notice when something's wrong. Because I failed once, and I won't fail again. I reached across the console and took his hand. You didn't fail me. Not yet, he said, and I don't intend to. We sat there in the parking lot holding hands, 2 broken people who'd found each other in the most unlikely way. And somewhere across town, Kevin Mitchell was probably discovering that I hadn't come home. The Medford Inn smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and stale coffee. David got us 2 rooms on the 2nd floor side by side. We stood in the hallway between them at 1:15 in the morning, neither of us wanting to say goodnight. Try to get some rest, David said, though we both knew that was impossible. I nodded. You too. But 15 minutes later, sitting on the edge of the generic hotel bed, staring at beige walls and mass-produced art, I couldn't stand it. My mind was racing. Every shadow seemed threatening. Every sound in the hallway made me jump. I pulled out my phone and texted David. Are you awake? The response came immediately. Yes. Do you want to talk? Please. 30 seconds later, there was a soft knock on my door. I checked the peephole old habits, then let David in. He'd taken off his jacket but still wore his button-down shirt and slacks. His eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion. I made coffee with the in-room machine, I said, gesturing to 2 styrofoam cups on the desk. It's terrible, but it's hot. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Some things never change. We sat in the 2 chairs by the window curtains, drawn drinking bad coffee in a hotel room, while my entire life seemed to be falling apart. And somehow it felt almost normal. Safe. Tell me more about Emily, I said. You said she was in the hospital. How bad was it? David was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. 3 days in ICU, 2 weeks recovery. The skull fracture healed, but she had nightmares for months. Still does, probably. And Patricia blamed you. She had every right to. I'd dismissed Emily's concerns. Told her she was overreacting. The boyfriend, his name was Tyler, had been escalating for weeks. Showing up at her work. Calling at weird hours. Following her. And I told her she was being dramatic. You didn't know? I should have known. David interrupted, his voice harsh. That's what kills me. I'd worked security for 23 years. I knew the signs, but it was my daughter and I didn't want to see it. Didn't want to believe that some man would hurt my little girl. He set down his coffee cup, his hands shaking slightly. The night it happened, Emily called me first. Not 911 me. She was terrified, said Tyler had been at her apartment again, that she'd seen him trying her windows. I told her to call the police, that I'd come over in the morning. David, he broke in 2 hours later, used a crowbar on her patio door. If her neighbor hadn't heard the screaming and called 911. He couldn't finish the sentence. I reached across and took his hand. It wasn't your fault. Patricia didn't see it that way. She said I'd always put work first, that I'd never really been there for Emily. And when it mattered most, I'd failed. She packed her bags 2 weeks after Emily got out of the hospital. Took Emily with her. They moved to Sacramento. Do you talk to them? Patricia sends pictures sometimes. Christmas cards. Emily won't talk to me. She tried for a while right after they left, but I could hear it in her voice, the disappointment, the hurt. Eventually she stopped calling. We sat in silence for a moment. Then David looked at me. Really looked at me. When I saw Kevin on your porch tonight trying your door, I had this moment where I was back there, back to Emily, calling me, asking for help, and me brushing her off. And I thought, not again. I won't fail again. You saved me, I said quietly. You were paying attention when no one else would have been. You trusted your instincts. You saved me first, he replied. Before all this, you treated me like I mattered, like I was worth talking to, worth knowing. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Most passengers don't even look at me, Tanisha. I'm just the driver. But you saw me. Tears were streaming down my face now. Because you're worth seeing. So are you. And that's why I won't let Kevin Mitchell hurt you. We talked until 4:00 a.m., drinking terrible coffee and sharing pieces of ourselves we'd kept hidden. I told him about Richard's final days, how I'd held his hand and told him it was okay to let go. How guilty I'd felt for feeling relieved when it was over. Not that he was gone, but that the suffering had ended. David told me about the mill closing, how he'd felt like a failure watching younger men get jobs while he got rejection after rejection. How Patricia had looked at him one day and said, "I don't recognize you anymore." By the time the sky started to lighten, we were both exhausted but calmer, connected in a way that went deeper than words. "Try to sleep for a few hours," David said, standing to leave. Detective Morrison said she'd call later today. "David," I said as he reached the door, "thank you for everything." He turned back and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Hope. "Thank you, Tanisha, for reminding me why the work matters." Detective Morrison called at 11:00 a.m. Wednesday morning. David and I were in the hotel's breakfast area, picking at stale muffins and watery orange juice. "We have the warrant," she said. "We're executing the search at Mitchell's residence right now. But Mrs. Williams, I need you to come in. We found something and I need you to verify some information." At the police station, Detective Morrison led us to a conference room. Spread across the table were dozens of file folders, their edges yellowed and worn. "We found these in Mitchell's garage," she said, "hidden in boxes under a tarp. There are over 100 files here, all from Riverside Medical Center, all elderly patients." My hands shook as I picked up the nearest folder. Margaret Chen, age 73, Medicaid patient. According to the billing code stamped on the folder, she'd undergone a complex cardiac procedure in June. But when I opened the file, the actual medical notes showed she'd only had a routine checkup. "He was billing for procedures that never happened," I breathed. "That's what it looks like. But here's where it gets complicated." Detective Morrison pulled out a notebook. "We also found bank records showing deposits into Mitchell's account, regular payments always for different amounts totaling about $35,000 over 2 years. The payments came from an offshore LLC that we're still tracing." "He wasn't working alone," David said. "No, someone was paying him to steal the files and cover the fraud. We need to figure out who." Detective Morrison turned to me. "Mrs. Williams, you said you're part of an audit team. Who else knows about the missing files? Who would have access to both the files and the ability to submit false insurance claims?" I thought about it. "It would have to be someone in administration, someone who could authorize procedures, submit claims, access patient records. That's a lot of people. Doctors, nurses, department heads." "What about your audit team? Who's on it?" "Just 4 of us. My supervisor, Janet Rodriguez, me and 2 other billing clerks, Amy Peterson and Robert Lindsay." Detective Morrison made notes. "Anyone else at work who's been asking questions about the audit, showing unusual interest?" I started to say no, then stopped. "Wait, there was someone. About 3 weeks ago, Dr. Hayes, he's the medical director, came down to our office. Said he wanted to check on our progress, make sure we weren't overwhelmed. Janet thought it was odd because Dr. Hayes never comes to billing. He works on the executive floor." Detective Morrison's pen paused. "Dr. Bradley Hayes, yes. Why?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she picked up her phone and made a call. "I need everything you can find on Dr. Bradley Hayes, medical director at Riverside Medical Center. Banking records, phone records, everything." She hung up and looked at me. "Mrs. Williams, I need you to go back to work." "What, babe?" "Tonight, your regular shift. We need you to act like everything is normal." "Detective, I don't think," David started. "We'll have officers in the building," Morrison interrupted. "Undercover. Mrs. Williams won't be alone, but if Dr. Hayes is involved, he's going to be nervous. Kevin Mitchell didn't come to work today. He knows something is wrong. If Hayes is the one paying Mitchell, he's going to panic. And panicked people make mistakes. You want to use Tanisha as bait," David said, his voice hard. "I want to catch whoever is running this fraud operation before they disappear. And yes, that means Mrs. Williams needs to be visible. But she'll be safe, I promise you." I looked at David, then back at Detective Morrison. Every instinct told me to refuse to stay hidden in the hotel until this was over, but I thought about those files on the table. Dozens of elderly people who'd been victimized. People like me trying to get by on fixed incomes, trusting that the medical system would treat them fairly. "I'll do it," I said. That evening I walked into Riverside Medical Center at 3:00 p.m. for my shift, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. David had wanted to come with me, but Detective Morrison said no, we couldn't raise suspicions. But she'd given me a small device that looked like a fitness tracker. "It's a panic button," she'd said, "and a microphone. We'll hear everything. If you're in danger, press it twice and we'll be there in 30 seconds. Janet looked up when I arrived at my desk. Tanisha, I heard about what happened. Are you okay? Word had spread fast. Small hospital, smaller town. Kevin Mitchell had been arrested. Everyone knew. I'm fine, I said, forcing a smile. Just ready to get back to work. The first few hours passed normally. I processed insurance claims, updated billing codes, answered emails. 3 plainclothes officers were scattered throughout the hospital, Detective Morrison had told me. I wouldn't know who they were, but they were watching. At 7:45 p.m., my desk phone rang. Internal extension. Tanisha Williams, I answered. Mrs. Williams, this is Dr. Hayes. Could you come up to my office? I have some questions about the audit. My blood ran cold. Now, if it's convenient, I'll be here until 9. Of course, I'll be right up. I hung up and immediately pressed the panic button twice. Then I stood, grabbed a notepad to look official, and headed for the elevator. Dr. Hayes' office was on the 4th floor in the administrative wing. The hallways were quiet this late. Most executives left by 6. My footsteps echoed on the polished floors. His office door was open. Dr. Bradley Hayes sat behind a massive mahogany desk. His silver hair perfectly styled his suit, probably worth more than my monthly salary. He smiled when he saw me, but it didn't reach his eyes. Mrs. Williams, please come in. Close the door. I did, my hand shaking slightly. The panic button was transmitting. The police were listening. I just needed to keep him talking. You wanted to ask about the audit, in a manner of speaking. Dr. Hayes stood and walked around his desk. He was a big man, at least 6'2", and he used his height deliberately, towering over me. I've been hearing concerning things, about Kevin Mitchell, about missing files being found. Yes, the police found. I know what they found. His voice was sharp now, the veneer of friendliness gone. And I know you're the one who started asking questions. You and your little audit team. We were just doing our jobs. You were being nosy. He moved closer. Do you have any idea how much money is involved here? How many people you're going to hurt with your meddling? People were already being hurt. I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Patients. Elderly patients who trusted us. They never knew, Dr. Hayes hissed. Insurance paid the claims. No one was harmed. Except that's insurance fraud, a federal crime. And now, thanks to you, everything is falling apart. Kevin was supposed to handle this quietly. He was supposed to... He stopped, realizing what he'd just admitted. Supposed to what? I pressed. Break into my house. Intimidate me. What was the plan, Dr. Hayes? His face flushed with anger. You should have minded your own business. The door burst open. Detective Morrison and 2 uniformed officers rushed in. Dr. Bradley Hayes, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, insurance fraud, and attempted intimidation of a witness. Dr. Hayes' face went white. You can't prove anything. Detective Morrison smiled. You just confessed to a room full of police officers. Mrs. Williams was wearing a wire. I touched the fitness tracker. Dr. Hayes' eyes followed my hand, and I saw the moment he realized he'd been caught. They led him away in handcuffs. I stood in his office, my legs shaking so badly I had to sit down. Detective Morrison stayed behind. You did great, Mrs. Williams. We got everything we needed. Is it over? I asked. The investigation will continue. We'll need to track down everyone involved in the fraud ring. But yes, you're safe now. Kevin Mitchell and Dr. Hayes are both in custody. You can go home. Home, Cedar Street. My empty house with Richard's handprints in the concrete. Except it didn't feel empty anymore, because I knew David would be waiting. The trial took 3 months. Kevin Mitchell pleaded guilty and cooperated with prosecutors testifying against Dr. Hayes and 2 others involved in the fraud scheme, a billing administrator named Jennifer Liu and a medical insurance liaison, Thomas Crawford. The total amount stolen $847,000 over 3 years. I testified twice, once in front of a grand jury, once at the actual trial. David came with me both times, sitting in the gallery, his presence steadying me. Kevin Mitchell got 8 years in federal prison. Dr. Hayes got 15. Jennifer Liu got 10. Thomas Crawford got 6. Justice, they called it. But it felt more like closure. What I didn't expect was the phone call David got one evening in March, 3 weeks after the trial ended. We were having dinner at my house that had become our routine, cooking together twice a week. He was teaching me to make his mother's cornbread recipe. His phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and his face went pale. It's Emily, he whispered. Answer it. I said. He did his hand shaking. Hello. I couldn't hear her side of the conversation, but I watched David's face transform. Shock, then disbelief, then joy. Yes, he said. Yes, of course. This Sunday I'll be there. Emily, His voice broke. Thank you. He hung up and just stood there, tears streaming down his face. She wants me to meet Lily, he said. She read about the trial, about what I did for you. She said maybe it's time to try being a family again. I hugged him tight, both of us crying in my kitchen over cornbread batter. 6 months later, on a Sunday afternoon, I sat in David's small apartment, except it wasn't small anymore. Emily and baby Lily had moved in 2 months ago. Patricia had remarried and stayed in Sacramento, but she'd encouraged Emily to reconnect with her father. The apartment was chaos. Toys everywhere, baby gates blocking hallways, the constant hum of a household with a toddler. It was beautiful. Lily, now 16 months old, wobbled over to me and climbed into my lap. She called me Nana Nisha, her toddler version of Tanisha. Emily said it was easier than explaining that I wasn't actually her grandmother, but in every way that mattered, I was. This was my family now, not connected by blood, but by choice, by a cup of coffee and a kind word and a man who'd learned to pay attention. Dad's making his famous spaghetti, Emily said, sitting beside me on the couch. Hope you're hungry. Always am for your dad's cooking. Emily smiled, then turned serious. Tanisha, I never properly thanked you for what you did for my dad, for showing him that he mattered. He saved my life, I said. See, he said. You saved his first, Emily replied. He was drowning before he met you, driving 12 hours a day, coming home to an empty apartment, no purpose beyond the next fare. You gave him purpose. You reminded him who he used to be. I looked at David in the kitchen wearing an apron that said World's Okayest Cook that Lily had grabbed off a store shelf. He was singing to himself, stirring sauce, looking happier than I'd ever seen him. He reminded me too, I said softly, that I wasn't alone, that family isn't always about blood. That night after dinner, after Lily was in bed, the three of us sat on the couch watching a movie. Emily fell asleep halfway through her head on David's shoulder. He looked at me across his sleeping daughter and mouthed, "Thank you." I thought about that first night almost a year ago now, getting into a stranger's car at midnight, scared and alone. I thought about all the small choices that had led here, a cup of coffee, a kind word, a man who'd learned to pay attention. And I realized that sometimes salvation comes in the most ordinary packages. Sometimes it comes in a silver Toyota Camry with a 5-star rating and a driver who just needed someone to see him as human. We'd saved each other, David and I. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, steadily, with small acts of kindness that added up to something bigger than either of us had expected. I still worked at Riverside Medical Center 3 nights a week, still lived at 847 Cedar Street. But I wasn't lonely anymore. I had David picking me up at 11:33, not because I paid him, but because we were family. I had Sunday dinners and a toddler who called me Nana. I had Emily who'd become like a daughter to me. I had purpose and connection and love, all because I'd seen a tired man behind a steering wheel and thought to bring him coffee. All because he'd noticed shadows where others saw nothing. Sometimes the smallest kindnesses save lives. Sometimes they save 2.